Well, welcome everybody. Um, my name is Kevin Heinrich. I'm a AMGA certified rock guide and one of the owners of Vertical Pursuits. We're a climbing guide service, I guess, but really we're instructors and mentors. But we're based in Northern California and we are running tons of courses around Northern California this summer. We also run trips in Mexico, Utah, Nevada, but um, yeah, check us out. I just sent out a few links there you could check out if you want to check us out. I don't want to highlight that I have a Intro to Trad course coming up the 21st at Lover's Leap, Intro to Multi-Pitch at the Emeralds on the 22nd, and then a Trad Beyond the Basics, our kind of most popular course and our favorite course to teach, basically for folks who already have trad climbing experience, feel like they're always soloing when they're climbing trad. That course is awesome to get confident in your placements and flip the switch from, thinking you're soloing to trusting your gear. So we got that coming up June 28th at Donner Summit. So would love to see you there. Um, yeah, so this evening, I kind of titled our webinar this evening as Trad Climbing the Basics or Trad Climbing Basics. And um, that's what we're going to talk about. In reading over the order forms, people filled out when they signed up for the event, it seemed like we had a lot of folks with some trad climbing experience, and that's awesome. And I'd be psyched to get into details and get into more advanced stuff as well, kind of in our Q&A section. Um, but my idea here is kind of to start with the basics, how we often start our intro to trad courses. And then we're going to use this webinar as basically an online component of our courses so that each day when I teach an intro to trad, I don't have to give my whole spiel here. I can have people watch the webinar beforehand, and then when they come, we can get right down to hands-on stuff. So just another way we're trying to have our programs be really valuable and super practical for folks that take vertical pursuits courses. So it's cool that folks have experience. I think I will be touching on some more advanced considerations that might prompt some questions for you. And please fire those questions away. Any quick clarifying questions, please send them in the chat box. I'll try and keep up on that and make any clarifications. And then when I'm done with my little song and dance, I'll have time for Q&A on any subject in climbing. It can be trad, it can be, multi-pitch, sport, whatever, rescue, ice, alpine, philosophy, whatever we want to talk about, I'd be psyched to talk about afterwards. So that's a little bit the agenda. How we doing here? Great, we got some folks in here. That's awesome. So, I'm gonna ask a check-in question for you all to get you all engaged. And my check-in question is, what is your kind of dream climbing location? So you can put that in the chat box. What's your dream trip that you're thinking about right now? Yosemite, Lofoten. Okay, Brenda took mine. Spain, amazing. I've climbed a ton in Spain, climbed a ton in Yosemite as well. Amazing places. Bugaboos. I've not yet been to the Bugaboos, John. Let's go together. That'd be awesome. Courtright Reservoir, cool. Wow, nice. They're coming in. J Tree. I'm not the biggest J Tree fan. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I think it would grow on me if I spent some more time there. Um, it's got character. It's got character for sure. Um, yeah, right on. I'm gonna match Brenda and say Lofoten. It sounds like we're gonna have to do a trip together there soon. Cool. Thanks for chiming in, y'all. This sounds like a lot of trad climbing destinations, save for Spain. Not a ton of trad climbing in Spain, although I've done some really awesome trad climbing there in a place called Galayos. This kind of alpine area, super cool. Check it out if you're into trad climbing on that trip, or you're probably better off just bringing a rack of draws and doing what they're famous for. Um, so cool. Did I miss any there? Dolomites, sweet. Yeah, we've been thinking about the Dolomites as well. We were just talking about it over dinner, actually. So cool. Cool. Thanks for chiming in, and please continue to do so. I love, when people are interacting and cracking jokes and chatting amongst themselves, and asking questions and clarifying questions. So please do that. Um, cool. Well, let's jump in. So again, like I said, we're going to start at the basics. I don't have a long kind of agenda today, so I'd be psyched to get questions from you all, so you can start kind of marinating on some questions. So what is trad climbing? Colloquially, when we say trad climbing, what we're referring to is climbing routes that are protected on with trad gear. Trad short for traditional. It's really weird though why it's called that, and it shouldn't be necessarily really because it's not really traditional. We think of like, oh, that's like real old school. Well, originally they were hammering in pitons, and then all this stuff, cams and nuts, that was like super new age, right? And it was clean climbing. The pitons were scarring up the rock. You're familiar with that if you've climbed in Yosemite. Um, and so it was I don't know, it's weird that we call it traditional, like old school. I guess relative to sport climbing, it is an older form. Sport climbing's um, certainly newer. But anyway, so we're referring to climbs that we protect mostly with our own equipment, um, nuts and cams, because this is the 21st century. We talk about nuts and cams. Um, but I would dive a little bit deeper into that, and I would say, so trad climbing, sure, is mostly protected with nuts and cams, or pro, and then sport climbing is protected exclusively on bolts. And then you of course have routes that have a few bolts and some gear. So maybe it's a few bolts up a face and then into a crack. Personally, I love that style of climbing. It's kind of like the best of both worlds. Um, but I would argue that there's sport route, bolt protected routes that are trad routes. And we spoke about J tree, and I know most of our audience is in California. Man, there's bolt protected routes there. They're totally not sport routes, right? You can't just go bolt to bolt on them, fall off, whatever. It's, a 100-foot slab with, four bolts on it. That route was developed with a traditional ethic. It was probably bolted ground up on lead from stances. They placed the minimum of bolts. So I would personally call that a trad route. And I think a lot of people, with a lot more practice with this language, would do similar. But colloquially, people would call that a sport route. Although I think you know that's extremely misleading, actually, extremely misleading. So anyway, so yeah, that's what trad climbing is. It's climbing, and to protect ourselves, we're placing these funky devices into cracks and clipping our ropes to that, and that's what's holding us if we fall. Probably no surprises there from folks. Um, it's interesting. Um, Sport climbing obviously protected on bolts. How does it differ? There's so many ways it differs, from sport climbing. Um, the movement's quite different, actually. When we're trad climbing, we have to have a crack in the rock in order to place this equipment. So often trad climbing, not always, we can face climb and be fiddling bits of gear in. That's a really fun style of climbing. But generally there's gonna be cracks. And so often we're crack climbing for our movement. So the movement's a bit different. Crack climbing movements often always focused on a center line, and you're kind of dancing around that line. Whereas sport climbing movement's kind of a little bit more opened up and a little bit more twisty. And yeah, obviously the protection's different. Um, you know, People think of trad climbing as more dangerous than sport climbing. And, I suppose I agree. But I wouldn't say it's like a no-brainer. A crack, if a crack runs from the bottom of the route to the top of the route, and I bring enough gear, I can place a bolt effectively, and I trust my gear like I trust bolts. Um, I I can place a piece wherever I want. If I get up into a crux, I can decide to be on top rope for that crux. When we're sport climbing, we're kind of like left to the route developers' decisions about where the bolts are. And they might know the secret we don't know. Oh, you have to traverse right, then up, then left to clip that bolt. And we're there trying to go straight up. looking at kind of a nasty fall potentially. So I don't think I could say that they're equally. There's an additional layer of chaos with trad gear. With that said, in my trad climbing career, I didn't introduce myself super in depth with my experience. I've done that in all the other webinars, and sometimes I just feel like I'm talking about myself. But I've climbed a lot of trad, and I fall a lot. I like to push myself. I like to try hard. I fall on my gear pretty much every time I go climbing. You don't have to do that. It's just something I enjoy, that aspect of climbing. I've pulled out one piece of gear in my uh, climbing career, 15 years trad climbing. So, and it was this guy, not this exact one, but a little point two. Um, Maybe we'll talk about that later. But so I pulled out one, okay, and a lot of falls. It was early on in my climbing career. Sport climbing, until recently, I pulled out zero. And then on a trip in Mexico recently, it wasn't me that pulled it out, it was my follower, pulled a bolt out. So anecdotally, one bolt's been pulled, one piece of gear's been pulled. Interestingly, my business partner Eric in Vertical Pursuits, he also likes to try hard on gear and fall on gear. He, in his climbing career, has pulled out one piece of gear. So I mention that because I feel like a lot of times people are like, gear pops out randomly all the time, and oh my gosh, it's so dangerous. And that might be true for some people. I know people who've been climbing a lot less time and pulled out a lot more gear. But that comes to judgment, right? So, if you're the type of person that's going to chime in on a Thursday evening to learn more about trad climbing, you probably have a decent base of judgment. Often I'm teaching courses, and the people who paid for a course like probably have decent judgment. But I like to share that, the amount of gear I've pulled because, we see media, Instagram whipper stuff and gears ripping, and it's all very exciting, and we hear the stories, and those stories get shared. You don't hear the stories of like, oh yeah, I popped off and the gear held, and because that's not that interesting of a story. So I like to share that, um, that I've only pulled one piece, and yeah, I fall a lot. In all of our courses, I fall. I'm on lead, and I make sure the blayer's okay with catching a fall and is comfortable, and I fall on my gear because I practice what I preach. So, but there is an additional layer of chaos. When you're climbing, it's easy to accidentally kick your trad gear and knock it out of position. If you're stressed out, if you're in like a really tough move, you're more likely to place low quality gear. Whereas if you're sport climbing, you're just going to clip the bolt, and the bolt's good no matter if you're on like really hard climbing or not. You know, I will also say that the bolt that pulled, so I'm not freaking people out, it was very obviously terrible. I was leading and I looked at it, I was like, what? I do not trust that at all. I think I still clipped it, but I entered free solo mindset. And then my partner was just pulling on all the bolts because we were having a 25 pitch day, and she was just kind of cruising through. It was on time wave zero. And she kind of pulled it straight out. And it wasn't a major surprise, but it wasn't like a beautiful looking bolt that somehow pulled. And the same with the piece of gear I placed. I placed it badly. And then I was an idiot and fell on badly placed gear. That's my own fault. And I pulled it out of the wall. So yeah, that's a little nod to like, is it more dangerous? I think it probably has to be. But if we're talking about a place like Indian Creek, for example, where it's just a splitter crack the whole way, as long as you have enough gear, it's like safer than bouldering. It's safer than sport climbing. I mean, you just put a piece wherever you want. But often, especially as a California climber, I think I'm mostly talking to California climbers. On granite, we have, sections that pinch down. We have a lot of old school climbing routes here that don't have bolts to protect the slab part. The crack runs out and you have to run it out, above that last piece you got. So you can be more selective, and about your routes, but I think I would be pretty unfair of me to say that it's as safe as sport climbing. Um, cool. Um, so sweet. So why is trad climbing so rad? I think we have a lot of trad climbers with us today, so feel free to chime in why you think trad climbing so rad. I will share kind of my list. Um, One of the reasons I think trad climbing is really awesome is I find cracks very aesthetic. You can see them from a distance. You can see like on El Cap, you can see, 1,000-foot crack lines and you can climb them. And so I find them very beautiful and aesthetic, these clean lines on rock. Whereas to me, a sport climb kind of is like, I don't know, doesn't look like much to me personally. Um, Adventure. I think trad climbing is a real adventure, and that's what got me into climbing originally. I and still is what I kind of enjoy about all this stuff is that adventure mentality. I started more like mountaineering and stuff, and then slowly became more of a rock climber. But I love that adventure aspect, and I think if you're the type of person who's thinking about trad climbing and you like, hiking and backpacking and like going on adventures and stuff, you probably dig trad climbing. Um, you know, Trad climbing goes hand in hand with um, climbing bigger routes. We're not necessarily going to talk about multi-pitch climbing tonight, but you know, climbing big swaths of stone, big mountains, because they're not going to go drill bolts, up a 5-4 ridge line. You got to be able to trad climb to do those sorts of things. So um, it comes with a lot of adventure. Um, Self-sufficiency, I think, is really cool. Like in theory, you don't need anyone to have climbed that piece of rock before. You can come with your equipment, with your. I should point over here more when I talk about equipment because this is modern climbing equipment. These are relics, so I should be pointing this way. Um, all you need really is your experience, your knowledge, and your equipment, and you can climb a piece of stone. Um, I love that I don't need someone else to have come and put bolts and bolt anchors and all that sort of stuff. I can get it all done with my gear that I bring and I take home, and the rock is none the wiser. The reality is the routes we commonly climb on are very clean from traffic. If you want to see what rock normally looks like, go do a first descent. You will be aghast at how dirty and crumbly the rock is. So I think that's really cool that we can bring all our own equipment, and it's not just equipment. You need the knowledge and have these awesome adventures. Um, Another thing that makes trad climbing so rad is the challenge. Um, I think part of what a lot of people like about climbing is the challenge of it. And I'm certainly in that boat. And adding on these layers of I have to bring the right equipment. I have to place it properly. Once I place it, I have to decide whether I trust it or not, and then decide if it's okay for me to go and crux and potentially fall on that gear. I have to decide, make sure, see what gear is next, and make sure I save that piece for up top. I have to decide how to extend my gear. I get to build this kind of protection system. And so there's this additional, like, almost engineering component, and then an additional kind of psychological component beyond just, oh, I'm afraid of taking big falls. Well, sure, you could have that sport climbing, but it's like, you know, overcoming that voice that says, that's telling you to be afraid and kind of trusting in your own experience and knowledge and overcoming that. So that's another thing I think is so awesome. Um, Nobody's chiming in. Nobody wants to share what they think so awesome. Maybe we are all beginners here. That'd be great. I would love to be talking to a group of beginners right now. Um, yeah, some practical things that are so awesome about trad climbing. I already mentioned one, which is you're not going to sport climb up, something in the Alpine. There's no sport routes up, the Incredible Hulk or like I'm trying to think of more scrambly things like Mathis Crest or like um, even more scrambly. I'm trying to think of, like these like low fifth class, mountain peaks. Like you're never gonna have a sport route up those peaks. So trad climbing gives you access to that. And in general, as you know, American-based rock climbers, especially, well, all over the US, really, um, it opens up so much terrain to you. You know, if you're a sport climber, yeah, you can go to sport climbing crags. There's some good ones here and there in the US. Man, go to Spain if you want to go sport climbing. Go to France if you want to go sport climbing. But we have insanely good trad climbing in the US. And so it opens up, and just a ton of it. So it just opens up so much terrain, so many different places you can explore, new places you can see, new friends you can meet, all that sort of good stuff. And last of all, it's rock climbing, and rock climbing's awesome. You know, it's cool to play with different flavors of this climbing game, whether that's, you know, God forbid, bouldering, but even bouldering's pretty fun. I'm a convert recently. But yeah, like dabbling into ice climbing, mountaineering, and you know, it's all climbing. It's cool, the depth to all this activity. So those are some of the things I think is so awesome about trad climbing. And if that got you a little bit excited, you might really dig trad climbing too. For me, it was all about adventure. You know, when I started climbing, top roping was an epic adventure, going out with my friends to go top roping. And then it was like, I actually kind of learned to lead trad and sport kind of at the same time. But, you know, then that became the adventure. And then multi-pitch climbing became the adventure. And then big walls. And now it's more like route development for me is more of an adventure. Um, so I'm always kind of chasing that dragon, that drug a little bit. Cool. So now you're all psyched, you're hooked. You're like, oh my gosh, how do I get into this activity? Great question. It's not the easiest thing to get into. It's you know a big downside maybe of trad climbing, arguably, is it's not super cheap, right? Like all this stuff. I don't know what the going rate on a cam is now. Um, it's probably what's it like 75 bucks for a cam. And you know, I'm showing a small collection of, you know, my gear. I've got my entire bin sitting right here with tons more stuff. So it's not cheap. That's a bit of a downside for sure. Although arguably this kind of investment gives you access to way more climbing. Um, you know, more climbing areas and more climbing experiences. So, um, one of the great ways to get into this activity is through friends, meeting people, getting some exposure. I think that's getting harder and harder these days as we have more and more climbers, more and more new climbers, and less available, basically mentors. Um, I think that model is really glorified, and rightfully so. This kind of mentor-mentee model, but I think it's increasingly difficult, if not impossible, for a couple of reasons. One, all those new climbers coming in, there's not enough mentors, and two, to be a little bit. This is my opinion. I think climbers are a little more selfish. In the past, like there was only two rock climbers. And so if some new person seemed really interested, you would foster them and grow them so that you could climb with them and you had a partner. Nowadays, I think climbing's a little more self-centered and there's a lot of people. And so why would I teach this beginner and then I'm taking my weekend and I'm not doing rad stuff for myself? I'm kind of like held back by this beginner. So that's just my opinion. I don't know if other people feel that that's to be the case, but friends are a great way to learn. You know, a problem with, you know, I'm a, you know, professional climbing guide, so um, I'm clearly biased in how to learn to trad climb. But friends are great. They can get you exposure to it. The problem with friends is they're not necessarily professionals, and at best you can only ever know as much as they know. And you know, when somebody's, you know, doing something every third weekend and doesn't necessarily mean they're the best, which is fine. But when it comes to things that have our life involved and have the potential to injure and kill us, then you might want to get some professional instruction, which brings me to professional instruction. Of course, we run tons of courses. I'd be happy to recommend guide services to people in different areas, but check it out. They're obviously fantastic. they're of varying quality for sure. And of course I'm biased, but I think we run the best climbing courses you could possibly take. Um, but yeah, consider that. If you can't afford it, reach out to us if you're in our area, and reach out to guide services. We love to try and make things happen for folks. There's nothing we like more than a really excited person. Like that is so fun for us to teach, and so we're motivated to make that happen. You can also learn on your own. You can read books, you can watch lots of videos, and you can exercise a ton of caution if you're gonna kind of like teach yourself. Um, I think, the best strategy is all three. You take courses, you make friends, you climb with friends, you learn from them, you read books, and you exercise caution. Um, cool. Do we have any questions so far? We still have anybody here? Anyone fall asleep? No? Cool. Great. Well, next I was going to talk about, we've talked about so far what trad climbing is, why it's so rad, and some ways to get into this activity. Take my course, June 21st is the correct answer. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about the equipment. I've laid out a little smorgasbord of trad gear here. So our main players are cams, which are these guys. I brought a nice big one over so that it's a little easier to see on the video, but this is a number 5. This is a larger cam, but easy to see. So it's called a cam or a spring-loaded camming device or a friend or I don't know what else people are calling them these days, but it's a cam. If you're in America, people are going to call them cams. So pretty cool. And then another bread and butter piece of equipment for a trad climber is our nuts, also called stoppers, chocks. What else are people calling them these days? People call them nuts. This is, if you're an American climber, we call them cams, we call them nuts. You go other places, people call them cool things. It's kind of fun, but yeah, a set of nuts. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 pieces of gear right here. We'll get into the benefits of different pieces of gear. So that's modern trad climbing equipment, cams and nuts. There is some esoterica, some pieces of gear that are helpful in particular climbing places, locations, and particular styles, perhaps. And then there's some stuff that's just kind of like totally useless. So that would be, pitons. Pitons, like that's old school. People aren't using those anymore. For good reason. It scars the rock, and it's pretty much terrible technology. Now, for hard aid climbing and developing new routes and stuff, yes, they're useful. But I'm being a little inflammatory here, kind of intentionally. Next, other esoterica, so meaning stuff I don't think is worth talking about right now, would be like hexes. These are hexes. They have a really cool shape. I love them from a nerdy standpoint. Um, I really do. It's not, we're just not using them. They're selling them. People are teaching hexes still. I think if your instructor spends time during your climbing day, your intro to trad course talking about hexes, you should ask for your money back. That's my professional opinion. We're not using them. You know what people use with their hexes? You know what I use my hexes for? I use them to hold pens, and I've used them to help jack up my car. People aren't using hexes. Anyway, other esoterica, tricams. Tricams are so cool. I actually think they're quite useful. I love the way they work, again, from kind of like a nerdy engineering perspective. I'm not an engineer. I'm just pretending to be one. But tricams, I think, are actually quite useful in certain areas. Horizontal cracks, the gunks, Looking Glass Rock in North Carolina. I think they're a great addition to people's racks. Unfortunately, people don't know how to use them. People don't know how to clean them, and you need your partner to be able to clean them. So I actually I have a t-shirt with hexes on them, but I don't rack them anymore. But that is equipment that's out there, not standard kit. And then there's other stuff like wacky little ball nuts, also really cool equipment, and very practical and very useful. Hexes, no. Pitons, no. Tricams, ball nuts, yeah. But not our standard um, set of kit for modern trad climbing. So not worth our time talking about them any further. So we're going to be talking about cams and nuts. Some other pieces of kit relevant to trad climbing would be a nut tool or a way to help remove. I'll give you guys a secret. Um, Maybe I shouldn't tell you because I clean, aka booty, a lot of gear. I won't embarrass myself by telling you how much of this gear is booty up here, but I'll give you a little secret. The nut tool, you can use it on cams. So anyway, this helps you remove kind of stuck gear, especially nuts. Although I try and reach for it as little as possible, and often I don't even bring one, and I still get all the gear out. But yeah, so nut tool, that's part of our trad climbing kit. Michele's asking me about monkey fists. So knots of equipment, knots of cord and stuff. That's also, not a real thing in US climbing. It's a real thing in certain spots. Um, I have seen people like have those wrapped, like just knots, like a sling with a knot in it, and then they jam the knot in the crack. And you know what they do? They don't fall. And you know what happens when they do fall? They rip them out. It's like that stuff doesn't work. Um, yeah. Again, to speak about these things just briefly. Um, Other trad climbing equipment, a standard quick draw. I'm pausing for dramatic effect. People think you don't trad climb with these. You definitely trad climb with quick draws. Quick draws are awesome. They're extremely ergonomic. They're extremely easy to use and lovely extensions for our gear. We'll put these on our nuts, and we can also, add a short extension to our cams with the quick draw. So standard sport climbing quick draw is trad climbing equipment. I'm emphasizing that because, I see a lot of folks making these kind of mental errors with trad climbing. And they rack all of these, which are alpine draws. That's what we call them, or an extendable draw. People call them alpine draws. So I can use that short, and then I can also extend it longer, classic, longer, to help reduce rope drag or to help make sure my piece of gear stays exactly where I want it to be. So this is also trad climbing equipment. These are not very ergonomic. They get all tangled and snafu'd like you just saw happen to me. And so I like to carry a collection of both alpine and quick draws when I'm trad climbing. And the blend of those two things will depend. But I see way too many people carrying like 15 alpine draws to climb a single pitch trad route. I'm talking to beginners and I'm talking to more advanced people all at once because I know we got some folks out there. Cool. Some other equipment. I won't talk about everything, but there's offset cams. So this cam has a smaller set of lobes on this side, blue 0.3 lobes. And then on this side, it has 0.4 lobes. So it's an offset cam. I love those, especially as a California granite trad climber. They're amazing. I don't think they're necessarily specialized bits of gear. Offset nuts, that's mostly what I carry. They're fantastic. And what I would recommend beginners start, you don't need a set of regular nuts, just go straight to offset nuts. Cool. I think that's it for like a basic overview of our gear. So let's dive in a little bit more here. Let's talk about our cams. So cams range in sizes from, quite small. This is one of the smallest units on the market right now, a Zero Black Diamond Z4. Very, 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 very tiny, to humongous. This is not even, not even close to the biggest size. It's just the biggest size I own. This is a number 6. So they range in sizes quite a bit. Um, a standard rack would be probably point 0.3 to 3, talking in black diamond sizes, and maybe you add on a smaller one or a bigger one when needed, but that would be kind of a standard single set. And for sure, you want to be leading with a double set. Generally, just speaking generally. Um, so cams are amazing. They really revolutionized climbing, and why they're so amazing is for this purpose, for this reason right here. They can protect a parallel-sided crack. So there doesn't need to be any constriction. They can be placed in a parallel-sided crack and they are full strength. So it really, they came about in the mid-late 70s to be available, and just completely blew the lid off of trad climbing and climbing in general. So they are not cheap. I think we mentioned that. We can place them in parallel cracks. They're quite heavy. This one's not that heavy, but a double rack of cams is quite heavy relative to the, however many pieces, 12 pieces I said this was. And they're really quick to place. That was a mix of pros and cons all in once, but to place a cam, it's pretty quick and easy, and I'm ready to clip my rope. They're also quite easy to clean. So these are, the most beloved portion, I would say, of a modern climber's rack. And then a little bit more about nuts. So nuts are a little more, significantly simpler, a little more archaic in the sense that, there's no moving parts, there's not much engineering going on here, there's not much physics. It's just a wedge shape. It's just a tapering wedge shape. Hopefully you can see that, bigger on top, smaller on the bottom. And you find a constriction in the rock and you set it in there and it can't possibly come out. So they're very simple, and that's a huge benefit to them. In fact, I actually learned to climb, like my first 2 seasons of trad climbing were on a single set of nuts, which I would not recommend anyone do. But there's no mystery to a nut placement. You stick it in there, and if it's bigger than the hole beneath it, it's gonna stay. For the most part, there's other factors going on, but yeah, they're cheap. They're lightweight, and they're very simple. It's very easy to see that it's going to work. Some downsides are they're slower to place. I have to take this set off of my harness, select the nut I'm going to place, slot it. I have to set the nut. People don't set their nuts enough. Set your nuts hard. Then I take the set of nuts off. Then I go for one of those draws, because there's no carabiner on this. Then I'm going to clip a draw to it. Then I'm going to clip the rope. So it takes a while to place. And then my follower has to, yank it out of there. And often they'll end up using a nut tool as well. So they're going to be down there fiddling with it. And that's if I didn't fall on it. If I fell on it, it's probably going to take them a while to clean that nut. Although not necessarily, once you get better at cleaning. Let's see. Yeah, another thing we need a constriction to place a nut into. So what I'm talking about is, where can we see very well? Right here. So yeah, we need like an obvious kind of constriction in the rock that we're going to be able to, place our nut into. Bad drawing, but you get the idea. It's absolutely not going to work in a parallel-sided crack. So you have to find a constriction. And something I'd like to identify for the, people a bit more experienced, even if a crack is subtly constricting over time, that's not a very good nut placement. Inherently, what you're going to get if you have a subtle constriction, a tapering of the crack, is a placement with good surface area on one side and then just like barely the tip of the nut touching on the other side. So that would be bad. So we want to find these more obvious constrictions. So if I had like, this in my crack, um, placing a nut above there. So that's a downside. I need a constriction. Cams, I still love constrictions and I utilize those, but I don't need one. Perfectly parallel is fine. Even a bit of a flare is okay. A bit. Um, Flares are, I want to get deep into the physics of cams and what the flare does, but maybe not right now. Somebody asked me a question about that. Um, Cool. I think another thing worth mentioning about nuts, this is kind of a psychological thing. There's no magic to nuts. Now, there's no magic to cams either, but people treat them like there's some magic to them. They shove them in, they know objectively it's horrible, but they're still like, it's a cam, maybe, there's some magic going on. Nuts, there's no magic. It is or it isn't. And I find that, quite comforting. I remember when I first got my first set of cams, I was freaked out by all the springs and moving parts. Um, so nuts are completely what they call passive protection. I think the terms passive and active are just kind of like, um, academic terms really. But there's no moving parts. You just sit them in there and they sit there. Cams are active protection in the sense that when I pull on this, the cam is actively pressing into the walls of the crack. Cool. We got a question. Do I ever use Big Bros? So I have, Big Bros are a particular use case. They're a tube style chalk. That's how you would kind of classify them. I don't have any to show you, I'm sorry. But it functions on the concept of a strut. So, a Big Bro basically in a crack, it's going to function like a strut. So it's shaped in a particular way so that it enters the crack at an angle. It's got kind of an expansion sleeve. You spin it, it widens up and it ends up like this across the crack. And then you clip your rope in on this end. And then since your force is applied to this end, it tries to pivot and it holds itself into the crack. So they are fantastic for offwidths. So we're talking about cracks that are bigger than a fist. That's generally what we mean by offwidth. So, when we're getting into these sizes and beyond, it's a 5, a 6, 7, 8, 9. They're great for that. To be honest, nobody's falling on Big Bros. Nobody's falling on Big Bros. They're using them, they're pushing a cam above them in their off width, they're pushing it above, and then periodically they'll take a Big Bro and they'll leave the Big Bro behind the cam, and they'll keep pushing and bumping the cam. So people off width on top rope. And then since it's hard to carry a bunch of these to protect the whole pitch, because you don't want to just you don't want to just have one cam that you're trusting your life to. People will use Big Bros behind, and leave them behind because you can't bump a Big Bro. You can't even blow on a Big Bro. You'll knock it out of place. I'm just kidding. But I've used them a bit. I'm not a big off width person. But yeah, generally if you're gonna use those, they're gonna be bigger, and you're not gonna carry them as part of your standard climbing kit. So cool, good question. Cool, I got another question. Let me see. Okay. Somebody asked, why do I recommend regular nuts? I just kind of said get regular. Sorry, why do I recommend offset nuts? I said just kind of go straight to offsets. Why? So I have a regular nut on here. It's kind of small, but I'm all about offsets. I just find they go in way better because I find where I place nuts as a California, mostly granite climber, I mostly place smaller nuts. The biggest nut I carry is this one. I think there's a few sizes bigger because that's mostly the what I'm looking for. What I'm looking at with nut placements, I'm looking at these kind of small little pods on the climbs I'm looking at, or the climbs I'm climbing. Bigger nuts, I'll just use a cam personally. But yeah, in those smaller placements, the rock almost always, as you go into the crack, narrows. And so I find if I take a regular nut, it's like trying to fit a square peg into a triangular hole. Literally, that's what it is. And so with that square peg, that regular nut, it'll hit the back of the crack where it's tapering in. It'll hit it and it won't be able to get in there. Whereas an offset nut that's tapered, right? So it's wider here, narrower here. That's a triangle fitting into a triangle shaped hole. And I'll be able to get that nut slotted in better. So that's not a controversial opinion at all, actually. People are just like, I have a lot of controversial opinions, but offset nuts, hands down, the way to go. No question about it. If you already own regular nuts, don't feel bad about yourself. It's fine. Use them, abuse them. But consider getting some offset nuts, perhaps. Um, great. Um, Cool. So I was gonna, how are we doing on time? Good. Okay. I don't have a ton more to get through. And then we can open up to more questions. I hope you're thinking of some. I would love to answer your questions and give you some value from showing up tonight. Um, let's talk about the parts of a cam and the parts of a nut. Spoiler alert, there's not very many parts to a nut. And before we get into that, I wanna say, with cams and nuts, we spend a lot of time thinking and talking about cams. They're gorgeous. We love them. They're expensive. We prize them. Um, and we don't talk that much about nuts, to be honest. And part of that's because, and a big part of that is they're so simple. A nut is so simple. But just because we talk a lot about cams, don't think that these aren't an important part of a rack. I think modern climbers are like kind of poo-pooing on nuts and they think they're lame and slow and I think I think that's a detriment. Um, Especially for beginners. This is so many pieces of protection in such a small package. And when you're a newer climber, you should be placing lots of protection and lots of protection throughout the pitch. And these are a great option for that. There's also, I should have mentioned this in my kind of, big benefits of a nut. We'll just compare. These are roughly the same, would protect roughly the same size crack. A nut is well, this one's not way, but you can't see that, is way narrower than a cam. Um, not a, there we go. You can see how the head of the cam is significantly wider. Um, and so, the nuts I carry down to like this size. And there's no cam that's going to protect this crack. Absolutely no cam. And this is so, shallow. So that's a fantastic benefit of nuts. So we'll talk a lot about cams and cam physics and cam this and cam that, but let's not lose sight of nuts. And let's stop telling our less experienced friends, oh, I don't place nuts. Oh, nuts are lame. Because this is a lot of protection. That you should use. I like to rack my nuts up front because I like to use them. Other people just throw them on the back and forget about them. But cool, let's talk. I'll use my big cam as an example, and we'll talk a little bit about the parts of a cam, some terminology that can help us when we're asking questions about things. I'll kind of fire through this a bit. So first of all, we have a rack and carabiner. So this is going to be color coordinated to the cam. This one's quite faded. It's an old anodizing, but this is green, slings green, lobes are green. That means at a glance, I know what size cam this is because of the coloration. So rack and carabiner, nothing much to say about that. Then we hit the sling of the cam. This is the sling. Um, these are, you might want to replace every 10 years or so, or if they look kind of messed up. I've gotten some resewn, it's a few bucks. If you buy cams used, which I go for it, this stuff's expensive. Don't buy like ancient stuff that's rigid stems or like old generations of gear. I would try and get, either this most modern generation, which is what I'm holding here, or, one iteration back like the older C4s. But anyway, if you're buying used cams, you'd maybe consider replacing the sling. This is kind of the only soft material that um, can kind of degrade. Doesn't really degrade, but it could be damaged from um, acid or something like that. Um, so anyway, the sling, it'll have some information on there. The strength of the cam, what it's rated to. This is rated to 14 kilonewtons. It can also be placed passively like a nut. Don't get me started on that. I could place it like this. Don't do that, but you could, but you don't. Nobody does. But anyway, so it tells you that. Um, and it'll give you the date, the sling date. So this one's 2018. So that's helpful if you're checking your gear or buying new gear. So a sling, what does a sling do? Same thing it does on a quick draw, right? It reduces how much of the rope movement is going to move my cam. That's what the sling does. That's why the sling exists. Moving down, we hit the thumb loop. That's where our thumb's going to go when we're engaging the cam. And that's on the stem. There's cams that don't have thumb loops. Um, like this Metolius cam. Technically it does have a thumb loop. It's here. It's kind of like their ultralight model. I need a thumb loop personally. But some cams don't have thumb loops. The thumb loop, that's where your thumb goes. Then we have the stem of the cam. That's what kind of transfers the force to the head of the cam. Going down the stem, we hit the trigger bar. That's where our fingers go when we activate or engage the cam. This one has these fancy kind of trigger flip up things to hold it in place. Black Diamond's doing that on their fours and above, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's the trigger bar. Attached to the trigger bar, we have these trigger wires. Those are non-structural components, although if they fail at the wrong time, it can put you in some trouble. They often wear down and break, and you can replace them yourself, or you can send them off and have it done. But the trigger wires connect to the cam lobes and help us pull them retracted. Cool. Then we get up to the head of the cam, which is where the magic happens. There is no magic, but it feels like magic. Man, these are really cool pieces of engineering. Um, in the head of the cam, we have the axles. In this case, we have two axles. Many other cams, smaller units can't fit two axles. They'll have one. And other brands choose to only use one axle where they could use two. And there's some pros and cons to that that I'm not going to get into right this moment. Man, this cam's kind of beat up. So two axles there. Double axle gives me a little bit more range, and it allows the piece to be placed passively, which you shouldn't do, but you might do by accident when you kick it. Then also in the head, we have the lobes. These are our, beautiful, just incredible, nearly magical things. Cams have 4 lobes nowadays. I don't think there's anything in production that has less. In the past, there were, 3 lobe units, even 2 lobe units. A tri-cam, arguably, that I showed earlier is a 1 lobe unit. So we have the 4 lobes, which I'll get into a little bit more in a moment. And then we also have the springs. So in the head of the cam here, each lobe has a spring. And that's what's forcing these to open back up. Non-structural, but critically important. If your springs get dirty and they're kind of sloppy to open up, that's dangerous. You need this to be open and the cam lobes touching the rock for these to work. So cool. That is the parts of the cam. I'll give a little basics of how the gear works. Cool. Some questions coming in. Those look great. I'll get to those. Of how a cam works. So what is so amazing about these is this shape, the shape of an individual lobe. It looks kind of like part of a circle. It's not. It's part of a logarithmic spiral. And what's so incredible about that shape is at this is in theory textbook. This is not what makes a good cam placement. So don't think I'm saying you can place a cam like barely barely contracted. But in theory, the mathematics of this shape, at any level of contraction of this cam, from here to here, this is going to have the same, again, in theory, amount of holding power. Because when I contract it this much, this is a terrible amount of contraction. Don't do this. My contact point with the rock, let's say, is here. That is a certain angle below the normal of the axles. Usually nowadays 13.23. That's called the camming angle. And if I do this, it's the same. It's the same contact point, the same camming angle. And so the holding power, again, in theory, is equal throughout the whole range of the cam. If this was just a half circle shape, I'd have a different camming angle here, different there, different. So our range would be significantly reduced, and the predictability of these tools would be, marginal at best. So that's what's so cool about these, this design. So that's a little bit of how they work. You stick them in a crack. When you apply a force down to here, the lobe's trying to kind of pivot and rotate, and it presses itself against the rock. I'm not really interested in sharing a lot of detail about how to place good gear because I'm standing in a garage right now. That is not how you learn how to place good gear, and you're watching this on your computer on the couch. So I don't want to pretend like I'm teaching gear placement, but yeah, gear, the cams have a range where we want to place them. We don't want them really tipped out. That's what we call it when it's not very retracted. Even though the theory says that this has sufficient holding power, in practice, rock can break. And that's what happens generally when gear pulls. The gear is fine. It's the rock that breaks. That's the most important thing about gear placement is quality rock. But yeah, so we want probably like at least a rule of thumb would be this level of contraction of a cam. With the black diamond units, I look at these kind of at the top here, that these crests of the lobes have passed each other. And then, contrary to popular belief, all the way to completely slammed, that is the range of the cam. It's not just here to here, no, it's here to completely slammed. People call this overcammed. That's fine. I've never not been able to get a cam out. This is a convenience issue. Oh, it's going to be hard to remove. Good. That's what you want. You want your cams to stay in the wall, don't you? So anyway, I wanted to mention that. So you place the cam in its range in good quality rock. You clip the rope to it, and that's kind of the basics of, of placing a cam without, again, trying to get into detail or pretending or potentially giving somebody the wrong ideas about this. Get proper instruction in person, obviously, please. Great. Let me see if there's some questions coming in. Can I dance the cam? I don't think I can, unfortunately. I don't think I can. Question about brass nuts. Thanks, Ty. That's a great question. I'll jump into nuts here again and probably jump into that question. So thank you. Cool. So there's so much I didn't say, and I'm like contemplating myself, do I go back into it a bit more? I've thought about doing like an advanced cam physics webinar where we can talk about how a flare affects the camming angle and how that makes this and this and that, and oof, that would be so fun. But I don't think that's this. I don't think that's this webinar. So maybe another time if we're psyched on that. So let's talk about nuts. So we got the parts of the cam. I hit on everything there. That's important language for when you're learning, so that we are all talking about the same thing. So a nut, okay? You carry a set of nuts like this. They all are on a single carabiner, okay? So you would have one single racking carabiner for your nuts. People love to use ovals on their nuts for some reason. I guess it's a really nice symmetrical shape. I use this carabiner because I just do. I don't know. It is nice to have a carabiner that doesn't have a nose on it. You can see that's a key lock carabiner. That way, when you're kind of taking the nut off, you don't accidentally snag it and potentially pop it out. I've heard people say the opposite. I've heard people say they like a key lock because if they're accidentally about to drop a nut, the key lock is the last, or like the nose is the last line of defense. That seems like wishful thinking for me. But anyway, so we carry a set of nuts on a single carabiner. This is probably the most nuts I would carry. Um, my nut set is a bit heavy right now. I just bootied a bunch of nuts on a big wall in Yosemite, so it's a little more than I normally carry, to be honest. I wouldn't carry any more than this. If you're carrying more than this, separate it onto a separate carabiner. Um, and probably you just need to be carrying one set of nuts, unless you're really into placing nuts, which I'm kind of that guy. Not anymore, but like I learned to track climb exclusively on nuts, so I got a soft spot for them. So rack and carabiner, that's part of the action here, and then the parts of the nut, the wire and the nut. End of chapter. Um, no, but really, there's the wire, there's the swage. So this wire is swaged together underneath this little piece of plastic. And then there's some information on this. It's going to tell you the size of the nut, the manufacturer, and then it also has kind of the strength rating, 12 kilonewton in this case. Um, Basically indestructible. Gear does, even cams don't really, even the small cams don't really break. They break the rock. And then once they break the rock enough, they umbrella out if they only have a single axle, like the one piece I've ripped in my career is a single axle. It shifted, got tipped out, and then umbrellaed. A double axle cam doesn't umbrella. That second axle stops it from over opening. That's why you can place these passively. Oh, I did it again. I got into more details than I should. Um, cool. So yeah, the head of the nut, there's your parts. Let me see if I can mess with any of these. To show something. Okay, none of these are playing. Okay, here we go. So the nut is placed on a wire. Um, and then that wire bends in the head of the nut. So as nuts get smaller and smaller and smaller, the cable gets smaller and the bend radius here gets tighter and tighter and tighter to the point where it's no longer strong enough to hold a climbing fall. I don't carry nuts that small because I like to fall. Why would I carry nuts that can't hold a fall? For aid climbing, that's why. They'd hold body weight, but they wouldn't hold a fall. So I don't have any actually with me necessarily that small. But you can have nuts that are smaller than this and still can hold falls. And Ty had a nice good eye and noticed that I'm carrying some RPs. At least I think he saw that. So these are called a few things. Originally, they were called RPs after the inventor, rolled pulk, I believe. Nowadays, you'll hear them called Brassies, micronuts. But you'll notice they're incredibly small. And these are all, does this have a rating? This is rated to 6 kilonewton, this little guy, which is definitely still fall protection. Don't get me into forces. But 6 kilonewton is, less than your normal, yeah, it's not an extreme, what am I trying to say? Is not a common climbing fall. That's pretty intense climbing fall. I would argue 6 kn. So why can this be so much smaller and still full strength? Well, you'll notice there's no bend in the wire here at the head of the nut. It's actually soldered in. So I believe it's like silver solder they use. So there's no bend. So this cable's quite thin, but they don't put this tight bend on it through the head of the nut. And so I love RPs. They're a critical part of my rack. Again, there is no cam that's fitting in this size. Sorry, you guys can't see super well. This size crack. Um, and me personally, when I'm, the style of climbing I do, at the level I do it, just being honest, these are kind of the nut placements I need. I don't think it's necessarily a necessary part of a beginner's rack. And smaller gear in general, I caution beginners on, because smaller gear has a smaller margin for error, and I don't want people placing tiny stuff and trusting it when they don't have the skill yet. Um, but yeah, RPs also get so small down that they're no longer fall protection. Um, like this guy, I don't know, it's like really, really tiny. What is it rated to? 2 kilonewton. So that is not fall protection. 2 kilonewtons roughly making up numbers, um, like 450 pounds. Pounds to kilonewtons is not a, you know, don't don't yell at me. It's not a perfect conversion, but so yeah, I wouldn't really recommend carrying anything under 6 kilonewton. What's this tiny cam? I think it's 6. Okay, it's 5. This is rated to 5 kilonewton. I haven't taken any big whips on this. And I carry it only in specific instances, and I'm not that psyched to fall on it. But yeah, 5, 6 kilonewton. I wouldn't carry anything smaller than that. Um, so that's the parts of a nut. I don't think anyone needs a description of how a nut works, right? They're so simple. Find a constriction, put it in the constriction, set it. You want to give it a few tugs while the set of nuts is still on there, um, so that that the rope movement doesn't get it out of place. Cool. All right. Couple more things to mention. How to somebody asked, should you always overcam and place nuts really hard? No, you shouldn't always overcam. Um, if you're placing smaller gear, which small is going to depend, kind of just based on what I just said, small is going to depend on your experience level. And that seems kind of mean in a way, but like, brand new trad climbers, I call a 0.5, which is this size, small for them. And when smaller gear has a smaller margin for error. And so I actually want them to place, let me try and get a good background for you guys. Them to place this so tight that the tips down here are touching, so that it's kind of classically what people would say overcam. They use a bigger cam to demonstrate what I'm talking about with the smaller cam. I want them to place starting like here on small cams. So no, you shouldn't always overcam, but overcamming is okay. It increases the potential placement range of a piece so that we're not grabbing and re-grabbing and retrying. And then small cams, whatever small means to you and for your kind of experience level, you should definitely place them tight. Now, we talked about, in theory, a cam at any part of its range is equally strong. In practice, the tighter a cam is placed, the stronger it is. Okay, there's this myth about over camming, that it's dangerous, that it's weak. No, it's plenty strong. It's stronger even. So if I could fall on 2 different cams, one was really tightly cammed and one wasn't, I would rather the tightly cammed one. One, it's stronger, but strength's not so much an issue. All this stuff is plenty of strong when used correctly. But the springs, when I'm placing it tighter, the springs are under more tension. And so they're pressing harder into the walls of the rock. which means if there's a little dirt crystal under one of the lobes and that kind of crumbles in a fall, that spring is really tight and it's pressing harder um, to kind of expand if need be. Also, by being compressed harder, it's harder to wiggle that cam potentially out of place. So great question. And nuts, yeah, set your nuts. People do not set their nuts enough. Based on what I'm seeing when people are coming to our, more advanced trad climbing courses, set those things. Yank, yank, yank. If you're scared, do like 3 times that. Okay? And I guarantee I'll still come up and I'll flick it right out. Um, sometimes. Sometimes I'll have to use the nut tool, but set those things, please. Gear being easy to remove is a convenience thing. We need to be safe. We want to if we're just carrying the gear for like, to look cool, but we never fall and we never use it and we're just like these, it's just kind of like style, then none of this matters. But when you fall, these things matter. When so yes, please set your nuts. Really hard, that's subjective, but like give it a good few sharp ones. They're not that hard to remove. If your follower says, "Oh, it was so hard to remove all your gear," they're criticizing you. Well, tell them to get better at removing gear. In my climbing career, I've left behind one cam, um, and it was like it was like in a chimney, and then it was in like an off width, and then around the corner, like this small cam. I just couldn't get it. Found out a week later, one of my buddies had gotten it out. This was on the free rider. Now I'm bragging. Anyway, you can get the gear out for sure. So your partners, when you're a beginner, your partners are beginners. It's hard to get the gear out. You get so much better at it. People are always, boggled by they'll be working on a piece. Just last week, I had somebody working on a piece for way too long. I was like, just leave it. They came up to the blade. I wrapped down. I just pulled it straight out. So you'll get better at those sorts of things. Yeah. John says he only climbs to buy and carry gear. Man, I'm with you. I love the gear. If you're kind of a gear, you like the gear too and the way it works and stuff, trad climbing's for you. Big wall climbing's probably for you. All the systems, rope soloing might be for you. It's so fun. I love it. I love it all too. Unfortunately, I can't really afford much of it, but I collect plenty because I'm really good at removing gear. Um, cool. I'm going to talk about how to rack for trad climbing. I see a lot of weird stuff on the internet teaching people how to rack, and it blows my mind. And then I also see tons of weird stuff actually out at the crag. So I'm going to tilt my camera down, and I'm probably going to mess it up when I put it back up so you can see kind of how I'm racking. So I like a harness with 5 gear loops. This is the 5th gear loop. On the 5th gear loop, I'll put my lockers, anchor material, belay device, whatever, anything that's not being used on the pitch. Now, if you're single pitch trad climbing, don't carry tons of stuff. Somebody I worked with just yesterday, they were starting up a single pitch trad lead with me. They had 13 locking carabiners on their harness, right? They had a gree-gree, they had an ATC, they had various bits of cord. They had 13 draws for a single pitch trad climb. Get all that off of there, right? I'm just demoing here, but this is like, I'm not going to tell you what to carry, but you don't need all that stuff if you're single pitch climbing. So cool. So then I like to rack, and this is personal, but I'll tell you, this is very standard among, I'm going to crouch down so you can see me still. This is very standard among people who know what they're doing. I'll put it, I don't know, I don't want to be mean, but like, this is how people get rock climbs done. This is how they rack. There's other stylistic ways to do things, but I'm just saying my style here that I'm showing you is not niche. It is core. All the other stuff that people are teaching to me strikes me as very like weird, and sounds like stuff coming from people that don't actually climb very well, probably, or at a high level. You can rack different ways when you're mountaineering and stuff, but if you're cruxing out on an on-site, I think this is how you want to rack. So shut up, Kevin. Tell them the way. Okay, so I rack small to big, so smaller cams up front. I'm showing kind of a basic standard set, which would be, I think, 0.3 to 3. But don't carry your number 3 up a finger crack, okay? So, so small to big. One set on one side and one set on the other side on this front gear loop, okay? This is just the general, okay? There's going to be variations to this. Um, I'm not clipping cams together like this. No, that's how you drop gear, okay? Um, I don't know why people are telling people to do that. So one set on one side and the other set of cams on the other side here, okay? Cool. Then I carry my draws on this second gear loop, okay? And I like to carry, like I said, quick draws because they're extremely ergonomic. A mixture. It's going to depend if I'm multi-pitch climbing, if I'm single pitch climbing, what that individual pitch looks like, kind of my combination of quick draws and regular draws. But there's 5. So assuming I have 5 on the other side, 10, that's reasonable for um, a long multi-pitch, wandering multi-pitch pitch. The more experience you get, people way overextend. Sorry, you're looking at my chin. People way overextend their gear. That's an aside. We should be extending not so much, especially when we're climbing a straight up crack. You don't need to extend anything probably. So maybe don't carry 10 draws on a single pitch trad climb. Maybe carry 3. I don't know. Just giving you food for thought. This is how I like to rack it. Smaller draws, so my quick draws in the front, alpine draws in the back. Okay, and then it's so easy for me to grab a 0.3. I don't have to look. That's a 0.3. Where's a number 3? Well, it's the back of my front gear loop is going to be my biggest cam, the number 3. It's right here. Grabbing a small draw right here. Grabbing a big draw, the back of this gear loop right here. I didn't have to look for any of that. So by racking in that way, I can, I knew I was going to mess my camera up. By racking in that way, I can get to the gear. And when I look down on this, all these carabiners are color coordinated. So if it's in my front gear loop and it's got a red carabiner, it's a number 1 cam. So I'm grabbing the right thing. This is how you climb stuff that's a bit harder. When you're climbing 5.5 and you don't trust your gear and you're just standing there and you have both your hands and you can do whatever you want, yeah, it doesn't matter if your stuff's all messy because you're just standing there. But if you want to progress into whatever number, you want to grab the right piece quickly. Cool. So that is how, I'm going to sound a bit rude, but that is how good climbers rack. Try it for yourself if you're racking in a different way. Racking multiple cams onto the same cam, no, no. That's how you drop things. You're in a panic, you're going to grab the one off your gear loop and it's going to have 2 more connected to it. You're going to have to put it back. We want to be able to put good gear in quickly. You don't have to climb hard trad to have fun. I'm just sharing. These are some of the ways you progress. And then yeah, draws on the back loop. If you don't have this 5th gear loop, people will put their whatever else they have, on the back of this this gear loop. But I demand the 5th gear loop from a harness. Cool. I haven't mentioned our good friend nuts. So this I would say is not, what I just shared is core, like anyone climbing probably even 5'10", but anyone climbing 5'11" or up in the state of California on gear is racking like that. That might not be true, but I would probably bet on it. Nuts are a little more personal preference where you put them. Me personally, I learned to climb on nuts. They are also the smallest pieces of gear that I carry. So I carry my nuts on one of the sides, right? I'm only showing kind of one side, but right up front, personally. Um, I know a lot of people that put them completely in the back. And guess how many nuts those people place? None. And that's okay. That's okay. But I think they shouldn't probably go in the very back because you want to use them. This is a lot of gear, and you need to place a lot of gear as a beginner. You need to protect the whole pitch as best as you can. So I would think, whether it's in the front of your gear loop or the back, have them accessible. Um, and yeah, that is my little spiel about racking. Some questions coming in about that. That's great. Um, Cool. Um, yeah, I might as well get into those. So Michaela asks, how many cams can you fit in your harness? A triple set? More than that. More than that, I would say. I think you can. This is a like super skimpy sport harness. Like super skimpy. These are like tiny gear loops. Um, you know, you wouldn't, it'd be weird to carry a triple set, to be honest. You would carry maybe triples in a few of the sizes, but you're not going to carry a complete triple set. Probably this wouldn't fit a complete triple set. But yeah, I could, because let's look at it. This is a single set, so presumably we have another single set on the other side. I can easily fit another point 0.5 on there, I'll just start grabbing stuff a black totem, which is a bit smaller than a point 0.3. I love offset, so a point 0.3, point 0.4 offset, point 0.2, point 0.3 offset. That's all still fitting. So I just added 1, 2, 3, 4 cams here. Presumably I did the same on the other side, so a ton. I will say if I'm carrying a lot of stuff, I will start to break into this next gear loop, especially if there's one standout cam. Like maybe I'm carrying one number 4 or number 5. I'll put that maybe on its own. So lots of subtleties here. And it's also going to depend on the pitch that I'm climbing, right? I might actually rack all the gear on one side because I'm putting half of my body into an off width. And so I'm only going to be able to get gear off of this side. So lots and lots of subtleties. But yeah, good question. And that relates to the next question I saw. Ooh, lots of questions coming in. That's awesome. Do I ever use a gear sling? So a gear sling for the uninitiated would be not necessarily this. Like you can get a manufactured one that's nice and comfy and padded, but it's a sling you carry around your shoulder and you rack gear on. No, I do not use a gear sling unless unless it's an off width or a chimney, I might use a gear sling because this is really easy to switch the side of my body it's on. And so if I'm in a off width and I need to switch sides or I need to move this around, it's easy to do. So I might put my big cams on there. But I know one good rock climber that uses a gear sling for their gear in general. And I climbed with him and I laughed at him and he stopped pretty much right away. But based on social media, I think he's starting to do it again. But yeah, this is what they did before they had harnesses with gear loops. This gets really in the way. You can't look down at your feet, all the gear's in the way. It's hard to grab the right piece. This all kind of folds to one place. I do not like, whenever I'm looking down at my feet, I do not like this in my way of looking at footholds. So no, I don't use a gear sling. Um, I think they're super stylish. I want to use a gear sling, but I don't because I think it's impractical. But I think they are super stylish, to be honest. Now, nobody asked me this question, but I do rack some slings like this on a long multi-pitch. Some of my alpine draws, I'll carry with a single carabiner over my shoulder like this. I wouldn't carry more than maybe 5 at the most like this personally. All have to be slung the same way because probably if you're reaching for an alpine draw, you're going to extend it. So instead of having to take the time to do this, you can have this already over your shoulder, already extended, and the cam already has a carabiner on it, so you clip it straight in. And so it's a quick way to deploy an alpine. So I really like that. And it clears up some clutter off of my harness. I can have some of my slings up here. But a gear sling, no. Um, I don't see it a lot. But it is super cool. Um, Catching up on some questions here. How do you not drop all the nuts while trying to place gear? Yeah, good question. Practice. Where'd I put my nuts? Uh, I did almost drop one recently, but dropping things happens, okay? It happens. Um, but yeah, how I don't drop. So how I place a nut, I haven't really talked about this. I don't think it looks, we can if we want, but how I place a nut, I grab the entire set off my harness. I usually know which nut I'm going for, but you can hold the set up to that constriction. Then you put the nut you're going to place in your mouth, drop the rest of them. That selects this nut. Then take it, place it, set it, and then take it off. That's how I do it. Have I dropped nuts? Sure. Not often. That's how I place them by kind of like the dropping selects that size. So I put it in my mouth, drop the rest of them, and I end up with this clean thing that's hard to drop. Um, What sizes do I recommend to triple up on? I don't basically as a rule have like sizes. Arguably your nut set is a triple in whatever sizes those are. Now you can't place them obviously in parallel cracks, but it's going to depend. I think honestly, one of the a great way to progress in trad climbing is carrying a lot of gear. Now that's expensive, I know. But hey, if you have a double set and your partner has a double set, bring it all to the crag. Bring it all to the crag. Also, by the way, go cragging to get better at trad climbing. If you only climb trad on multi-pitches, it's gonna be harder to improve. But bring it all to the crag, and then you can load yourself up, and it's gonna give you so much more confidence. When I go trad cragging, I bring my Indian Creek rack, pretty much. And that way I can triple, quadruple up on anything I might need, and my partner can do the same. And I actually think that's been huge for particularly my partner's development, having the confidence to carry all that gear. I don't know if Brenda's still listening, but she could chime in the chat if she agrees with that. So what sizes do I recommend? I don't know. What sizes are you climbing, but maybe you could start to build out a triple set. Some tricky size. Yeah, it depends on what you're finding is tricky for you. What do you find you're running out on the climbs you're doing? Is it hand size cracks that you're doing? Personally for me, I'm doubling up or I'm tripling up in like, often in like the 0.3, 0.4, 0.5 range, because those are the kind of cruxy climbs I'm doing. So it's going to be different for everyone. But yeah, good question. Um, cool. Another question. If you're climbing with only one set, would you still put everything on one side? No, I would split it up. It would be rare for me to climb with only one set, but yeah, I would alternate it unless there was any reason to do slightly differently. If it's a corner facing a certain direction, I might put more gear on the side that's out of the corner that's more accessible than this that's pinned against the rock. But for me, like I carry a single set. Sometimes when I'm guiding stuff that's like quite easy for me, I just bring a single set. And no, I would alternate it. Yeah, good question. Um, do you retire old gear, especially totems? Yes, great question. I just threw some gear in the trash today. I I am a recovering dirtbag. So it's hard for me. Um, but yes, um, I don't throw out cams except for totems. So some people's aren't understanding. I haven't shown really totems today. This is a different brand of cam. Has a very, very cool construction. But I said in the past in my gear description that trigger wires weren't load bearing. Um, with totems, they actually are, the way they're constructed. and that makes these very good tools in certain flaring cracks, pin scars. Not as good as an offset cam, I will say. I prefer offsets for that, but they're fantastic tools. But yes, if these trigger wires wear out, which they have, and these are starting to, you have to throw away the cam for totems. Um, Other cams, I have a whole cam graveyard right now. I could run and grab it. It's like probably like 6 cams right now. Um, but those need triggers replaced. I love replacing triggers. Um, like here's some replaced triggers. So this is just some whatever wire, and that's been rocking for like I don't even know, probably like 5 years. So triggers I'll replace. This sling has been reslung. I had this professionally resewn, so I have my slings replaced. I'm cheap. Like I said, I'm a recovering dirtbag. I'm still a dirtbag, but um, can't say that from inside a house probably. Um, but anyway, so yes, cams are pretty simple. Replace the slings, replace the trigger wires, but keep them rocking. It's metal. They're good. They're good to go. I have broken cams properly, um, and those will get retired just because the lobes won't open anymore. Basically, the lobe gets a little deformed in a big fall. Much smaller cam than this. So yeah, I do retire gear. More importantly, I think to check and retire is your slings, your soft goods. If you're putting enough wear on your gear that you're needing to think about retiring things, congratulations. Like you're climbing a lot. That's awesome. Um, but yeah, soft goods freak me out. Um, I find people trusting single pieces of material. Oh gosh, I'm blown over time. Single pieces of material all the time, and with like their rappel extensions, and it freaks me out. I think we should have redundant material because a lot of my stuff's kind of worn out because I use it a ton. And I think when your stuff's brand new and shiny, you're like, oh, it doesn't need to be redundant. It's brand new and shiny. And I don't know. Um, Cool. Well, we hit 8:30, blasted past it a little bit there. So I'm happy to stick around a bit longer if folks still have some questions. But otherwise, I'll say goodbye to anyone who wanted this to end at 8:30, and thank you for coming. Um, and yeah, so thank you. But I'll stick around if you'd like to stick around and have any more questions. Again, check us out if you're. Oops, I was gonna share those links again. Maybe Brenda can help me out and share that same message. Check us out, Vertical Pursuit Climbing. Got a Intro to Trad coming up June 21st at Lover's Leap. Intro to Multipitch June 22nd at the Emeralds, North Tahoe. And Trad Climbing Beyond the Basics June 28th at Donner Summit. So we got a lot more courses than that going on. So check out the calendar. And yeah, thank you so much for coming. I hope it was valuable. And connect with us. Shoot us a question. Email me. Whatever. I'm here. I love doing this. I love supporting people. So don't be a stranger. And thank you all. You're very welcome. Thank you. Cool. Well, like I said, I'll stick around if anyone has any other questions. Um, Looks like we're getting some. Ooh, we're getting a bunch. Heck yeah. Let's go. All right, maybe I didn't grab a ton of gear to talk about questions on, rappel setup at questions and stuff. Let me run and grab something. What are these other questions? I'm following my first multi-pitch. What do I need to know? Okay, cool. That's a good question. Grant, does what lands lend themselves to being climbed on gear? Good question. Oh, going back. Don't run away. Don't run away. Um, Plugged my mic back in. I think I should be coming across good. Okay, so I'll take these in the order they appeared. What is my go-to rappel extension? So I do tons of different stuff. And you should too. That's, That's my personal opinion. We should be trying different things. Um, some people, that's the concept of that scares them. They only will do things that they've read in books, seen from guides. But look, there's no magic to this stuff. You know, you've got a brain. You can look at a system and determine the pros and cons of it and decide if it's okay. But I personally don't climb with a PAS or a Petzl Connect Adjust or whatever, always on my harness. There's nothing wrong with that. A lot of great climbers do that. I'm not into it personally. If you want to buy me one, maybe I'll start wearing it. But otherwise, I deploy a rappel extension when it's time to rappel. I have a whole webinar about rappelling, actually, Troy, which you might be interested in. It's on our YouTube channel. Um, yeah, so my go-to is usually I grab a double length sling. This one happens to be nylon. I'm usually not carrying a nylon one, to be honest. And I will basket hitch it through my belay loop. The belay loop can be the hard points. That's fine. I just want a little extra length. So the belay loop gives me a little extra length. Um, and then I simply just tie a overhand knot. This is a pretty go-to rappel extension for me. And then I'm using this to clip into the anchors, and I'm extending my ATC from here. So there's a lot of rappel extensions out there, and it's very common for very qualified people to be teaching rappel extensions without redundant material. Personally, I don't love that. And you get to make your own decisions, and that's the beauty of climbing. So an example of that I did for a while would be to offset this basket hitch and then tie a knot. And so what that allows is a longer tether to clip into the anchor, and then my extension's a bit shorter. But the problem here is I only have one loop of material. And again, like I said, lots of people are teaching this. Personally, um, I don't know. I want it to be redundant. There's lots of things in climbing that's not redundant. My belay loop's not redundant. The rope's not redundant. Belay device isn't redundant. Belayer's not redundant. But probably as a function of, you know, me using my gear every day, my gear is not shiny. And so when I'm using an, an 8 mil Dyneema sling that's been dragging around in my van for 7 years, I like to have redundant material. But yeah, that's a couple comments on that. Um, Thanks for sharing the rappelling webinar, Brenda. You can check that out, Troy. Um, cool. Caroline is following her first multi-pitch. What do I need to know? Can you give me a rundown of what is going to happen? So awesome. That's very exciting. I don't know if you're going with a guide or with a friend. Either way, they should be sensitive to the fact that you're on your first multi-pitch. What do you need to know? Um, I think the most important thing I think for a new follower is to know the order of operations on a multi-pitch climb. So probably, well, I'm not going to say probably, but people are very commonly using radios these days, which make communication really nice when it's your first time. Um, but yeah, there's going to be an order of operations. You're going to belay your leader up. You'll belay the leader. They're going to climb to the top. They're going to build an anchor. They're going to anchor themselves in with a clove hitch or a PAS. And then they're going to call down off belay. You're going to take them off belay. They're going to pull up all the rope until the rope comes tight on you. Then they're going to put the rope into their belay device and they're going to call down to you on belay, Caroline. And then and only then would you disconnect from where you are. Probably you start on the ground, obviously, but then when you're higher up, only after you've been told you're on belay and that rope's tight on you would you come off and clean the anchor and go climbing. Um, in a snippet, that's what I would say, that kind of process. Make sure you're comfortable with that process. And yeah, take time with your partner beforehand on the ground before you start that multi-pitch to uh, to talk about things and make sure that you're comfortable. But multi-pitch climbing is super rad. It's really cool. Enjoy it. There's a lot I could say about it, but I think you'll have a lot of fun. Michele asked, besides granite and desert sandstone, which rock types lend themselves to be climbed on gear? Yeah, great question. I'd say those are the big ones. I would say the other big one would be like basalt. Basalt is incredible hard stone. Um, so it can hold that's where ball nuts are actually really popular in basalt. A ball nut can be quite tiny and it's great for really hard trad climbing where they didn't put bolts. And since basalt is so compact, it can take that pressure. Desert sandstone, there's tons of types of sandstone. Like in Eldo out in Colorado, which I'm quite sure you've climbed in Eldo, that's a metamorphosed sandstone. So it's actually quite hard. Um, Quartzite climbs on gear pretty well, which is another metamorphosed sandstone rock type. Limestone, not so good. Not so good. That's why we trad climb in America and we sport climb in Europe. Um, you can climb limestone on gear. I've done it a bit in Spain, actually, in the Picos de Europa, but yeah, not so much limestone. But yeah, there's lots of. I'm kind of blanking on more, but I would say those are the main ones. There's so many different types of granite and sandstone. Um, but yeah, you can climb. Yeah, I'm not a geologist, but yeah, basalt for sure I would add to your list. And then all these kind of other variations of like metamorphic rock, these sandstone um, and quartzite. Um, yeah. How do you get over a fear of falling on gear? Yeah, this comes up a lot in webinars, and I think that's why our course, Trad Beyond the Basics, is so popular. June 28th, Donner Summit, if you want to come out. Um, there's a few ways to go about this, when you take an intro to trad course, right? You're told afterwards or your friend, it's like, don't climb really easy stuff. And that's good advice. Climb really easy stuff. And so you climb really easy stuff. You've been climbing really easy stuff for however long, a season, 2 seasons, a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. And you've gotten now lots of reps in placing gear. More often than not, you grab the right cam off your harness. You've seen a lot of different rock qualities. You've gotten the ergonomics of placing a cam. And that's what climbing on easy ground lets you do. Get a lot of reps with a lot of your brain available to place gear. Um, and then once you've gotten that experience, um, it's time to start climbing harder. And that's a really difficult transition to make. And that's what we help people do. Um, and how we help do that, one is, you place gear and we tell you whether it's good or not based on our experience. So that really helps, having a trusted friend or professional tell you, yes, you are placing good gear, or no, you're not. And what's critically important also is not that just you place good gear, but you can recognize when your gear is good, um, when it's not so good, and why that's the case. So you kind of understand those distinctions. This piece is bomber, absolutely bomber. Put a picture in a textbook. This piece is good, but I don't love this flare that's going on. So that's what I like to look for from somebody, that they can not just place good gear, but they can assess what would make it better, and stuff like that. And then, you have to expose yourself to falling on gear. Now, how can you do that in a controlled way? Take a course, obviously. With us, we fall on gear in our courses, at least. Probably many others you wouldn't, but you can mock lead. You can have a top rope as well. Be placing gear and take on your gear or fall on your gear with that top rope backing up. If you're going to practice falls, please, for the love of God, make them very small to begin. Place the gear above you, notify your belayer, and take the most boring fall in your life and work up from there, please. I see so many people, I'm going to practice falling, and they jump off from above. They scare themselves, hurt themselves, and it's just a step backwards. So start really small, gear placed above you, belayer informed that you're going to fall, and fall. You'll also learn how to fall. There's these different components. There's not trusting the gear. There's also being afraid of the act of falling, whether it's gear or bolts or whatever. And outdoors is different than indoors. Indoors, you're falling on an overhanging wall, you're just going to fall into space. You maybe touch the wall once. Well, outdoor climbing, especially trad, especially 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, the rock isn't this, it's this. So when you fall, you're contacting the rock. And the gym doesn't teach you that. So you have to learn the mechanics of falling on lower angle rock. And so that, you know, it's multiple things compounded. It's the fear of falling on gear, it's the fear of the gear ripping out, and it's a fear of falling kind of all at once. So yeah, kind of expose yourself to that in pieces and in a very controlled way. Um, Aid climbing is another way people recommend getting more comfortable with gear. You're placing it, you're weighting every single piece. I think you can accomplish the same thing free climbing. You know, climb the pitch, and then on your way down, before you clean a piece, clip in and bounce on it. Try and rip it out of the wall. Don't break your back, but try and rip it out of the wall. See how the gear reacts. But ultimately, taking falls is what's gonna get you the confidence. But don't do it blindly, right? Like you have to have your gear has to be good. That's the prerequisite. Gear has to be good, and then we can start falling on it, right? In that order. And an experienced friend might know what good gear looks like. They might be in the same boat as you, though. So a professional who's fallen on 1,000 pieces of gear would have a good suggestion for where if your gear is good and if you are ready to take that next step, and we'll kind of usher you on that next step. We all have different kind of risk tolerances and fears, more or less, more, and it's all a different process. There's no rush. There's no rush with any of this. Be cautious, take your time, um, and climb for decades. Cool. Another question. If you're belaying two from the top, do you clip the tagline into the gear two, or do you make the first follower do it? Or do you clip the tagline every so often into the gear? Cool. So party of three. Um, I do not recommend party of three climbing to newer climbers. It's a mess. Okay, it's a mess of rope. Everything takes forever. It's fun though. It's fun. You get to climb with more of your friends. Couple terminology things. So we're talking about party of three. Tagline, wouldn't be the correct term here, but I know what you're trying to say. A tagline you use, it's like a 6 mm cord, and you'll use it to like haul a small pack or something, or not even, or just like pull gear up to you. So that's just another, you have two ropes, right? You have the first, yeah, second rope. Yeah, so you have the first climber and you have the second climber. There's a couple different, to be honest, if you're asking about your first ever multi-pitch that's coming up, and now you're asking about party of three, a little bit of red flags. It's not unsafe necessarily, it's just a lot more complex. So you want to make sure your objective is small, and you have a lot of time to deal with these things. It's more complex, more likely to make mistakes. But there's two styles you'll climb in a party of three. There's what we call caterpillar mode, which is leader climbs, then follower number one climbs, trailing the rope to follower number two, right? All the rope. So this is the leader, they climb. Then they belay follower number one. Follower number one unclips all the gear and clips in the rope going to follower number two. And then follower number two is belayed afterwards. So climber one gets all the way up, and then climber two will climb. Very slow. Good reasons to do it. We do this guiding sometimes. Bad reasons to do it too. But it's maybe the simplest and maybe what I would recommend. So Caroline was asking about first multi-pitch for me. Oh, that's nice. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, great. Cool. Um, so that's called caterpillar mode, right? Because it's kind of like The idea is like it's an inching along caterpillar. The other method is what we call parallel. And so that's when you have both followers coming up at the same time. So usually a little bit spaced out. So follower one, follower two, and then the original leader. Um, and they're both coming up at the same time, a little bit spaced out so they're not falling into each other. Um, and your original question was, do you make the first follower do it, or do you clip the tagline every so often into the gear? So what I would recommend, again, party of three, this is guide level stuff. This is what you learn on your rock guide course, perfect on your future courses, and get examined on. It's tough. It's tough rope management. What I would say is you definitely don't just want to leave one of the ropes completely out of all the gear. Because if it was a traversing pitch like this, and only person one's rope is clipped to gear, person two is going to take a swinging nasty fall. Okay. Um, this is a big subject, but what I would say is as soon as you start clipping, how can I word this so briefly on the internet? Um, Clip both ropes to all the gear. Clip both ropes to all the gear. If you clip it together once, together again, you're asking for trouble. So it's easier to manage if you clip. It's maybe a little bit more drag, but clip both ropes. Treat both ropes as one rope. That's my advice. And then the first climber just unclips their rope, and then the second climber will take the gear out. So often I'll have that second follower be the more experienced one, and they'll be able to take out the gear. Um, so yeah, you do not want to be, clip both ropes to this piece and one to that one and then two to this one. That also helps because you should only be being belayed on one of the ropes, um, unless you want to do a double rope technique with an ATC, which is very British. Um, that'll also make sure you're clipping the correct rope you're being belayed on because you're clipping both of them. Um, cool. Um, Yeah, sorry. I hope I didn't offend you. I just assumed it was, you were asking about the first multi-pitch. So, um, cool. Haha, what up, Eli? Ty asks, is climbing a party three with a single rope, even on easy routes, no longer recommended? No, that's fine. Totally fine. Do that all the time as a guide. Well, I don't personally because on the train I guide. It's not particularly applicable. But yeah, no, that's totally fine. Either, end roping. Um, but again, this should be like, you know, these are advanced systems really. Um, but yeah, on easy terrain, sure. That's totally a legit technique that guides do a lot. Recreational parties, I don't know. I don't see it much. But we also, it's super common, for example, on the flat irons in the Front Range of Colorado, where you're climbing 5'4", at most, and then you've got two followers at the end of the rope. It's called end roping. Um, all sorts of particular details about that, but it's totally a legit technique. Yeah, but don't do it on 5'9". Don't do it on terrain people are going to fall on, basically, is how I can, these are really cool subjects. We could talk a lot about them, but um, maybe not the best through the internet. Well, cool. Well, that was great. Does anyone have any more questions? Otherwise, I'll call it a night. Um, Feel free to send me an email. What's my email? Is it up here? No. Kevin at verticalpursuitsclimbing.com. Feel free to send me an email. I'll get to your question when I can. And yeah, we love mentoring climbers. Check us out. Vertical Pursuits, practical knowledge, not armchair stuff, not textbook stuff, real world, really tried and true tested, really practical, not talking about hexes, talking about what people are actually doing to rock climb so that you can do it too. So thank you all so much, and we'll do another webinar soon. So link us up in the socials or whatever, and I'll be trying to do webinars every month, and I would love recommendations on what we should do them about. So Thank you so much. And I hope to see you out on the rock sometime. So have a good night and happy climbing. Stay safe out there.